This audiobook was created in good faith for educational purposes. Navajo Legends. Collected and translated by Washington Matthews, M.D., LL.D., Major U.S. Army, ex-president of the American Folklore Society, etc., with introduction, notes, illustrations, text interlinear translations, and melodies. Navajo Legends. Introduction. Prefatory remarks. 1. The legends contained in this book are those of the Navajo One Indians, a tribe living in the southwestern portion of the United States, mostly in the territories of New Mexico and Arizona, but partly in the states of Colorado and Utah. A definite reservation of over 12,000 square miles has been set apart for them, but in every direction, beyond the borders of this reservation, isolated families and small bands may be found dwelling, either temporarily or permanently, in localities where there are springs, streams, pools, or artificial reservoirs of water. Some have taken up homesteads or have otherwise acquired a legal title to lands beyond the borders of the reservation. Others are merely squatters. A brief description of these Indians, their arts, religion, ceremonies, etc., is included in this introduction, in the belief that, if the reader possesses some knowledge of the Navajo before he begins to read the tales, he may have a better understanding of the latter. But much more information of interest to the ethnographer will be found in notes. Some items in the introduction could not properly have appeared in the notes, as there was nothing in the tales to suggest them. Other items might perhaps as well have been transferred to the notes. The decision to put them in the introduction was often arbitrary. 2. Title of book. In selecting a title for this book, the word legends was chosen, rather than myths, for the reason that the tales contained herein, though mostly mythical, are not altogether such. In the origin legend, the last chapter, the growth of the Navajo Nation, is in part traditional or historical, and it is even approximately correct in many of its dates, as has been shown by Frederick Webb Hodge in his paper on the early Navajo and Apache. Home of the Navajos. 3. The land which the Navajos occupy is arid, though not an absolute desert. The precipitation at an altitude of 7,000 feet amounts on an average to only 14.10 inches during the year. At lower altitudes it is less, at higher altitudes greater, and this is generally confined to 2 short seasons of moisture, separated from one another by months of absolute drought, which, except in specially favored localities, would destroy any of our ordinary field crops. But there are small spots, far apart, where irrigation can be practiced, and there are other places, apparently deserts, which no white man would think of cultivating, but where Indians raise meager crops of corn, squashes, and melons. 4. Soil. He who stands on the brow of the mesa at the Indian pueblo of Walpi in Arizona may unravel one secret of Indian agriculture in the arid region and learn why ancient ruins may be found in the most desolate parts. 600 feet below him stretches a sandy plain which at most seasons of the year seems almost an absolute desert, yet in summer it is green with rows of dwarf corn. Little rain falls on it, and there is no irrigation, yet the corn grows and furnishes a return which repays an Indian, at least, for his labor. Through the plain runs a gully which at certain seasons drains the water from a high tableland beyond. The water does not all flow off, but in part settles under the sandy surface and keeps the subsoil moist throughout the year. By planting deep, the Indian farmers reach this moist subsoil and place their seeds where the long drought cannot destroy them. On the side of the mesa, peach trees flourish, with hidden moisture that comes out between the rocky strata at the mesa's edge. Localities similar to those described are found in the Navajo land, and similarly used by the Navajo for farms and peach orchards. The myths make frequent allusions to such farms or gardens. 5. A few fields have recently been made by white men in the high meadows of the Zuni Mountains at altitudes above 8,000 feet, where potatoes, oats, barley, and garden vegetables are raised without irrigation. But farming at such altitudes was never tried by the Navajos, and they knew nothing of cultivating the crops named above. Beside their aboriginal crops, they have for a long time raised a little wheat. Potatoes grow wild in the Navajo country. 6. Mines. Fortunately for the Navajos, no mines of precious metals have yet been discovered on their reservation, although for years past rumors of such discoveries have from time to time been circulated, and unwelcome prospectors have frequently invaded their territory. For many years previous to 1892, the principal attraction lay in the Carrizo Mountains. A legend of a mine called the Lost Atom, and of miners murdered in these mountains, had circulated long through Colorado mining camps. Troubles between intruders and Indians became so frequent and threatening in this region that General McCook, then commanding the Department of Arizona, which included the Navajo Reservation, determined to make an expedition and settle, if possible, the question of the existence of valuable mines in the Carrizo Mountains. A commission, consisting of General A.M.C.D. McCook, USA, ex-Governor John L. Barstow of Vermont, and Professor J.G. Allen of New Mexico, was appointed. The commission entered the mountains with a mounted escort in May 1892, and invited prospectors who had previously visited the region to come and show where the mineral lay. They came, and then it appeared they had staked off various claims and given them felicitous names such as the Western miners know how to coin, the Lucky Bill, the Boggy Snoggy, etc. Specimen ores were collected from every point where they were seen, and submitted to careful expert examination, but all proved worthless. Some fine gold has been found in the sands of the San Juan River, 3 within the Navajo Reservation, but it has not been found profitable to work for it. See Figure 1, Manuelito. 7. Surface, forests. The surface of the country over which the Navajos are scattered varies in altitude from 4,000 feet or less in the valley of the Colorado to over 11,000 feet in the high peaks of Cisnachni, 52 San Mateo, 54 San Francisco, 56, and the San Juan 58 range, which traditionally border their land. In the central and more thickly inhabited portion, the highest eminence is in the Tuincha Mountains, 9,575 feet. The average altitude is about 6,000 feet. The country consists mostly of great plains and of plateaus or mesas. While the lower levels, except in the bottomlands of the constantly flowing rivers, are destitute of trees, the mesas, at altitudes of from 6,000 to 7,000 feet, are well covered with low forests of Pinus edulis, red cedar, Juniperus virginianus, and juniper, Juniperus occidentalis. At altitudes of 7,000 feet, white pine, Pinus ponderosa, is sparingly found, but at altitudes of 8,000 feet or more, it grows abundantly and attains a good size. Spruce, Pseudotsuga taxifolia, is found in shaded valleys and on northern hill slopes above 7,000 feet, but it does not form an important part of the forest. It is an essential element in certain rites. Cottonwood, Populus monolifera and P. wislesinii. Aspen, Populus tremuloides. Oak, Quercus gambelii, oak bark juniper, Juniperus pachyphlea, and other trees grow less abundantly. 8. Pasturage, flocks and herds. While the Navajo Indians cultivate the soil, it is evident, from what has been said, that they do not do so to any great extent. Their crops furnish but a small part of their subsistence. But their sterile country is fairly well adapted to the raising of sheep and goats. These form their chief food supply, and the former their principal source of wealth. With the money received for their wool, they purchase flour and other provisions from the white traders, as well as various articles of luxury and utility. They possess many ponies and ride a great deal. They raise a few neat cattle. 9. As domesticated sheep and goats were unknown in America previous to the discovery by Columbus, and were unknown in New Mexico previous to the expedition of Coronado in AD 1540, it follows that the Navajos have not been shepherds for many centuries. It would appear from their legends that it is not many years since they have become a prosperous and wealthy people, and such they now are for savages, that in old days they were even poor hunters, and that they lived largely on the seeds of wild plants and on small animals that they caught in fall traps. How meagerly they were dressed and equipped, the legends also tell us. See Pars 382, 384, 391. Population. 10. No exact census of the tribe has ever been taken, and it would not now be an easy task to take one, because the Navajos are scattered so widely and over such a wild and rugged territory. Their low huts, built in tangled cedar woods, or in regions of scattered rocks, are often so obscurely hidden that one may ride through a cluster of a dozen inhabited houses, thinking there is not an Indian within 10 miles of him. When the Navajos were held in captivity at Fort Sumner, New Mexico, from 1863 to 1867, they depended for subsistence mostly on rations supplied by the United States, and then these captives, at least, could be accurately counted. There were in 1867 7,300 in captivity, 298. Owing to desertions on the one hand and additional surrenders on the other, the numbers varied from time to time. 11. But while the majority of the tribe were prisoners of war, it is well known that all were not captured during General Carson's invasion in 1863, but that many still roamed at large while their brethren were prisoners. The count of the prisoners, therefore, does not show the strength of the tribe. 12. Perhaps the most accurate census ever taken was that of 1869. In November of 1869, a count was made of the tribe, in order to distribute among them 30,000 head of sheep and 2,000 goats. Due notice was given months before, and the tribe was present. The Indians were all put in a large corral and counted as they went in. A few herders, holding the small herds that they had then bunched on the surrounding hills, were not in the corral. The result of this count showed that there were less than 9,000 Navajos all told, making a fair allowance for all who had failed to come in. At that time, everything favored getting a full count. Rations were issued to them every 4 days. They had but little stock, and, in addition to the issue of the sheep and goats, there were also 2 years' annuities to be given out. The season of the year was favorable, the weather fine, and they were all anxious to get the sheep and goats and annuities. 268. 13. In 1890, a count of these Indians was made as a part of the 11th Census of the United States. 297. Before the count was begun, the writer was informed by one of the enumerators that the plan to be employed was this. The Navajo country was to be divided into a number of districts, and a special enumerator was to be sent to each district at the same time to visit each hut and take the number of each family. Whether this method was carried out, the report of the 11th census does not tell us. But this plan, while probably the best that could be employed at the time with the means allotted, was very imperfect and admitted of numerous sources of error, of which 2 may be specified. Many huts might easily be passed unnoticed, for reasons already given, and this would make the enumeration too low. Many families might easily have been counted in more than one district, for the Navajo frequently shifts his abode, and this would make the count too high. The result of this enumeration was to give the tribe a population of 17,204 for that year. White men, living in the Navajo country at the time, generally considered the estimate excessive. If the count of 1869 be approximately correct, that of 1890 is probably not. It is not reasonable to suppose that by natural increase alone, and no other source of increment is known, the tribe should have nearly doubled in 21 years. It would require birth rates much higher and death rates much lower than those commonly found in Indian tribes to double the population in that time. The Indian mother is not prolific. 14. The Navajos say that during their captivity, they had much sickness and diminished in numbers, but nothing has been found in official reports to corroborate such statements. All who have any intimate knowledge of the Navajos agree that they have increased rapidly since they were restored to their ancient homes in 1869. During nearly 15 years that the author has had opportunity to observe them, he has noticed no marked signs of physical degeneration among them. Their general health and their power of resisting disease appeared about as good in 1894 as in 1880. Consumption and scrofula, those greatest enemies of our reservation Indians, have not yet begun to trouble the Navajos. The change from the rude hut to the close stone house, which is rapidly going on among this people, is likely to affect their health in the future, and probably not for the better. Fortunately for them, they have little fancy for stoves, but prefer open fireplaces such as the Pueblos and Mexicans use. In the year 1888, while the writer was absent from New Mexico, they had an epidemic of throat disease, the precise character of which has not been ascertained. They say that about 800 people died that winter. During the winter of 1894-95, they suffered from scarcity of food, an unusual experience for them, and the government had to assist them. An increased mortality ensued, which undoubtedly would have been much greater had it not been for the prompt action of their agent, Major Constant Williams, USA, in securing supplies for them. Racial affinity, appearance. 15. The Navajos are usually regarded by ethnologists as being, by blood as well as by language, of the Dean or Athapascan stock, and such probably they are in the main. But their origin legend represents them as a very mixed race, containing elements of Zunian and other Pueblo stocks, of Shoshonean and Yuman, and the appearance of the people seems to corroborate the legend. There is no such thing as a general or prevailing Navajo type. The people vary much in feature and stature. Every variety of Indian face and form may be seen among them, tall men with aquiline noses and prominent features, such as we find among the Crows and Dakotas, dwarfish men with subdued features, such as we see among the Pueblos of New Mexico and Arizona, and every intermediate variety. 16. The countenances of the Navajos are, as a rule, intelligent and expressive. Some are stern and angry, some pleasant and smiling, others calm and thoughtful, but seldom are any seen that are dull and stupid. These characteristics are to be noted among the women as well as among the men. The social position of the Navajo women is one of great independence. Much of the wealth of the nation belongs to them. They are the managers of their own property, the owners of their own children, and their freedom lends character to their physiognomies. Portraits. 17. Figure 1 is a picture of Manuelito, who for many years was the most influential chief among the Navajos. Latterly he lost much of his influence in consequence of his intemperate habits, though he was regarded as a sage counselor till the time of his death, which occurred in 1893. When he was gone, an old Indian, announcing his death to the writer, said, "We are now a people without eyes, without ears, without a mind." Figure 2 represents another chief of much influence named Mariano, who also became addicted to drink in his old age and died in 1893. Figure 3 shows a very intelligent and trustworthy Indian, a silversmith, known as Jake among the whites, but called by the Navajos Nautsos Nijhani, or paper carrier, because in his youth he was employed as a mail carrier between Forts Wingate and Defiance. He it was who communicated to the author version B306 of the origin legend. He practiced a short medicine rite, was an adept in singing sacred songs, and often led in song in the great rites. His silver work was in great demand, and he worked hard at his trade. In 1894 he accompanied a circus through the eastern states with his workshop as a sideshow, but the journey proved too much for him. He died of heart disease on his return to New Mexico. Figure 4 is a portrait of a Navajo woman named Tanapa, who took her hair out of braid preparatory to standing before the camera. Figure 5 is a woman named Hadapa, whose smiling face is introduced as a contrast to the stern brow of Tanapa. Figures 6 and 7 are Navajo men whose names have not been recorded. The expressions of their faces are in marked contrast. Crania. 18. As a rule, the crania of the Navajos are brachycephalic, and very few are dolichocephalic. The shortening seems to be due to a flattening in the occipital region, figure 8. The author is of opinion that this is caused by the use of the baby case, with a hard, unyielding wooden back, figure 9, in which the Navajo women carry their infants. This flattening of the Navajo occiput has been the subject of some controversy. It is true that the cradle is padded to a slight extent, but the padding consists of the bark of the cliff rose, Kawanaya mexicana, called by the Navajo a wetzel, or baby bed, which forms a rather rigid pillow. True, again, when the baby is carried on the mother's back, its head often hangs forward and does not come in contact with the back of the cradle or the pillow. But most of the time the child lies on its back, and its tender occiput is subjected to deforming pressure. Language. 19. The language of the Navajo undoubtedly belongs in the main to the Athapascan family. Hubert Howe Bancroft, in his Native Races of the Pacific States, Volume 3, p. 583, 292 tells us that the Athapascans, or Tene, are a people whose diffusion is only equaled by that of the Aryan or Semitic nations of the Old World. The dialects of the Tene language are by no means confined within the limits of the Hyperborean division. Stretching from the northern interior of Alaska down into Sonora and Chihuahua, We have here a linguistic line of more than 4,000 miles in length, extending diagonally over 42 degrees of latitude, like a great tree whose trunk is the Rocky Mountain Range, whose roots encompass the deserts of Arizona and New Mexico, and whose branches touch the borders of Hudson Bay and of the Arctic and Pacific Oceans. But the origin legend declares it is a mixed language. 395, and it is but reasonable to suppose that such a composite race cannot possess a very pure language. The various accessions to the tribe from other stocks have probably added many words of alien origin. What these additions are is not now known, and will not be known until all the languages of the Southwest have been thoroughly studied. Houses. 20. The habitations of the Navajos are usually of a very simple character. The most common form consists of a conical frame, made by setting up a number of sticks at an angle of about 45 degrees. An opening is left on one side of the cone to answer as a doorway. The frame is covered with weeds, bark, or grass and earth, except at the apex, where the smoke from the fire in the center of the floor is allowed to escape. In the doorway an old blanket hangs, like a curtain, in place of a door. But the opening of the door is not a simple hiatus, as many descriptions would lead one to suppose. A crosspiece, forming a lintel, connects the jambs at a convenient height, and the triangular space between the lintel and the smoke hole is filled in as shown in Figure 10. A picture in Schoolcraft's extensive work 327, Volume 3, Plate 17, is intended to represent a Navajo lodge, but it appears to have been drawn by Captain Eastman from an imperfect description. In this picture the doorway is shown as extended up and continuous with the smoke hole. 21. Some lodges are made of logs in a polygonal form, as shown in Figure 11. Again, they are occasionally built partly of stone, as shown in Figure 12. In cold weather, a small storm door or portico is often erected in front of the door figure, and an outer and an inner curtain may be hung to more effectually keep out the wind. 22. Shelters. Contiguous to the hut, the Navajo usually constructs a rude shelter of branches. Here, in fair weather, the family often cook and spend most of the day. Here, too, the women erect their looms and weave or set out their metates and grind corn, and some even choose to sleep here. Such a corral is shown in Figure 1223. Summer houses. In summer they often occupy structures more simple than even the hut described above. Figure 13 represents a couple of summer houses in the Zuni Mountains. A structure of this kind is built in a few hours. A couple of forked sticks are set upright in the ground. Slanting poles are laid against this in the direction of the prevailing winds, so as to form a windbreak, half wall and half roof, and this is covered with grass, weeds, and earth. The ends may be similarly enclosed, or may be merely covered in with evergreen branches. One side of the house is completely open. In Figure 13, a loom is shown set up for work in one of these rude structures, the aboriginal appearance of which is somewhat marred by having a piece of old canvas lying on top. 24. Medicine lodges. The medicine lodges, when erected in regions where long poles may be cut, are usually built in the form of the ordinary hogans, huts, though of much greater size, Figure 14. When these large lodges are constructed at low altitudes, where only stunted trees grow, they are built on a rude frame with walls and roof separate, somewhat on the same plan as the lodges formerly used by the Arikaris, Mandans, and other tribes on the Missouri, and seeming a connecting link between the Navajo Hogan and the Mandan Earth Lodge de 184. 25. Sweat houses. The sweat house or sudatory is a diminutive form of the ordinary hogan or hut as described in Par. 20. Except that it has no smoke hole, for fire is never kindled in it. Neither has it a storm door. It is sometimes sunk partly underground and is always thickly covered with earth. Stones are heated in a fire outside and carried, with an extemporized tongs of sticks, into the sudatory. Figure 15 poorly represents one of these structures. When ceremonially used, the frame is constructed of different materials for different ceremonies, and the house is sometimes decorated with dry paintings. 82. 26. Modern houses. During the past 10 years, a few of the more progressive Navajos have built themselves rectangular stone houses with flat roofs, glazed windows, wooden doors, and regular chimneys, such as their neighbors the Mexicans and Pueblo Indians build. They have had before them, for centuries, examples of such houses, and they are an imitative and docile people. The reason they have not copied at an earlier date is probably a superstitious reason. They believe a house haunted or accursed, in which a human being dies, not anyone abandon it, never enter it again, and usually destroy it. With such a superstition prevailing, they hesitate to build permanent dwellings. Perhaps of late years the superstition is becoming weakened, or they have found some mystic way of averting the supposed evil. Arts 27. The arts of the Navajos are not numerous. They make a very rude and inartistic pottery, vastly inferior to that of the neighboring Pueblo tribes, and they make but little of it. Their bows and arrows are not equal to those of the northern Indians, and since they have both money and opportunity to purchase modern firearms, bows and arrows are falling into disuse. They do not consider themselves very expert dressers of deerskin, and purchase their best buckskins from other tribes. The women do very little embroidery, either with beads or porcupine quills, and this little is unskillfully done. The legends indicate that in former days they stole or purchased embroideries from the Utes. 28. Basketry. They make excellent baskets, but very few of them, and have a very limited range of forms and patterns. In developing their blanket making to the highest point of Indian art, the women of this tribe have neglected other labors. The much ruder but allied Apaches, who know nothing of weaving woolen fabrics, make more baskets than the Navajos, and make them in much greater variety of form, color, and quality. The Navajos buy most of their baskets in wicker water jars from other tribes. They would possibly lose the art of basketry altogether if they did not require certain kinds to be used in the rites, and only women of the tribe understand the special requirements of the rites. Figures 16 and 17 show the patterns of baskets almost exclusively made. These are used in ceremonies and are called by the author sacred baskets. A further description of them is given in a note. 5. 29. Silverwork. There are a few silversmiths in the tribe whose work, considering the rudeness of their tools and processes, is very artistic. It is much sought after by white people, who admire its rude beauty. Probably the art of the smith has not existed long among the Navajos. In a treatise entitled Navajo Silversmiths, 307, the author described the art as it existed in 1881, but the work has improved since that time with the introduction of better tools. Then the smith built his forge on the ground and squatted to do his work. Now he builds it on an elevated frame, figure 10, and sits on a stool or chair to work. Figure 18 represents silver ornaments made by Jake in 1881. 30. Weaving. It is in the art of weaving that the Navajos excel all other Indians within the borders of the United States. In durability, fineness of finish, beauty of design, and variety of pattern, the Navajo blanket has no equal among the works of our aborigines. The author has written a treatise on Navajo weavers, 309, in which he describes their art as it existed some 13 years ago. But since that treatise was written, the art has changed. It has improved in one respect. An important new invention has been made or introduced, a way of weaving blankets with different designs on opposite sides. It has deteriorated in another respect. Fugitive aniline dyes, purchased from the traders, have taken the place of the permanent native dyes formerly used. In the finer blankets, yarn obtained from white traders has supplanted the yarn laboriously twilled on the old distaff. Navajo blankets are represented in figures 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 12. 31. The Navajos weave diagonal cloth in diamond-shaped diagonals, and to do this a change is made in the mechanism of their simple looms. They weave belts or sashes, garters and saddle girths, and these articles too require changes in the arrangement of the looms and in the methods of weaving. Figure 20 represents an ordinary loom, with one set of heels. Figure 21 represents a loom arranged for weaving diagonal cloth with two sets of heels. Figure 4 shows a woman wearing a belt of native manufacture. The women depicted in figures 5 and 21 wear dresses of Navajo cloth. 32. It is not only for gain that the Navajo woman weaves her blanket. Having worn it for a time until it has lost its novelty, she may sell it for a price that scarcely pays her for the yarn. One who possesses large herds and is wealthy for an Indian will weave as assiduously as her poorest neighbor. At best, the labor brings low wages. The work is done to no small extent for artistic recreation, just as the females of our own race embroider and do fancy work for mere pastime. 33. Knitting. They knit stockings with 4 needles, but these stockings are devoid of heels and toes. As the needles now used are of wire and obtained from the whites, it might be thought that the art of knitting was learned from our people. But knitted leggings, made of human hair, and wooden knitting needles have been found in the Navajo land, in cliff dwellings which, there is reason to believe, were abandoned before the arrival of the Spaniards. Industry. 34. It cannot be said of the Navajo men, as it is often said of the men of other Indian tribes, that they are either too proud or too lazy to perform manual labor. They are, and apparently always have been, willing to do any remunerative work. When the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad was constructed near their reservation in 1881, much of the grading was done by Navajo laborers. The white men who worked with them, and who had the strongest antipathy to Chinese laborers, said that they liked the Indians because they were good comrades on the work and kept up prices. A stalwart man is not ashamed to wash and iron clothes for wages, which he may want only to spend in gambling. They have been employed at Fort Wingate to dig cellars and make adobes, and at the latter work proved themselves more expert than the more experienced men of Zuni. 35. Begging, which among other tribes is so often annoying to the white man, is little practiced by the Navajos. The few who have ever begged from the author persuaded themselves that they had some claim on him. On the whole, they are a self-supporting people, and add to the wealth of the community at large. But little government aid has been given them since they were released from captivity and supplied with stock in return for that slaughtered by our troops when their land was invaded. Poetry and music. 36. For many years the most trusted account of the Navajo Indians of New Mexico and Arizona was to be found in a letter written by Dr. Jonathan Letherman, 303 of the Army, and published in the Smithsonian Report for 1855. Dr. Letherman had lived 3 years at Fort Defiance, in the heart of the Navajo country, when he wrote this letter, and he acknowledges his indebtedness for assistance in preparing it to Major Kendrick, who long commanded Fort Defiance. Both the doctor and the major were men of unusual ability. The former, having changed the spelling of his name to Letterman, afterwards distinguished himself as medical director of the Army of the Potomac, and the latter was, for many years, professor of chemistry at the National Military Academy. 37. From this letter, the following statement concerning the Navajos is extracted. Of their religion, little or nothing is known, as, indeed, all inquiries tend to show that they have none. The lack of tradition is a source of surprise. They have no knowledge of their origin or of the history of the tribe. They have frequent gatherings for dancing. Their singing is but a succession of grunts, and is anything but agreeable. 38. The evidence of these gentlemen, one would think, might be taken as conclusive. Yet, 15 years ago, when the author first found himself among the Navajos, he was not influenced in the least by the authority of this letter. Previous experience with the Indians had taught him of how little value such negative evidence might be, and he began at once to investigate the religion, traditions, and poetic literature, of which, he was assured, the Navajos were devoid. 39. He had not been many weeks in New Mexico when he discovered that the dances to which Dr. Letherman refers were religious ceremonials, and later he found that these ceremonials might vie in allegory, symbolism, and intricacy of ritual with the ceremonies of any people, ancient or modern. He found, ere long, that these heathens, pronounced godless and legendless, possessed lengthy myths and traditions, so numerous that one can never hope to collect them all, a pantheon as well stocked with gods and heroes as that of the ancient Greeks, and prayers which, for length and vain repetition, might put a Pharisee to the blush. 40. But what did the study of appalling succession of grunts reveal? It revealed that besides improvised songs, in which the Navajos are adepts, they have knowledge of thousands of significant songs, or poems as they might be called, which have been composed with care and handed down, for centuries perhaps, from teacher to pupil, from father to son, as a precious heritage throughout the wide Navajo nation. They have songs of traveling, appropriate to every stage of the journey, from the time the wanderer leaves his home until he returns. They have farming songs, which refer to every stage of their simple agriculture, from the first view of the planting ground in the spring to the harvest home. They have building songs, 6 which celebrate every act in the structure of the hut, from thinking about it to moving into it and lighting the first fire. They have songs for hunting, for war, for gambling, in short for every important occasion in life, from birth to death, not to speak of prenatal and postmortem songs. And these songs are composed according to established, often rigid rules, and abound in poetic figures of speech. 41. Sacred songs. Perhaps the most interesting of their metrical compositions are those connected with their sacred rites, their religious songs. These rites are very numerous, many of them of 9 days' duration, and with each is associated a number of appropriate songs. Sometimes, pertaining to a single rite, there are 200 songs or more which may not be sung at other rites. 42. The songs must be known to the priest of the rite and his assistants in a most exact manner, for an error made in singing a song may be fatal to the efficacy of a ceremony. In no case is an important mistake tolerated, and in some cases the error of a single syllable works an irreparable injury. A noteworthy instance of this rule is a song sung at the beginning of work on the last night of the great ceremony of the night chant. The rite is one which may cost the patron from $200 to $300. It has lasted 8 days and nights, when 4 singers, after long and careful instruction by the priest, come forth painted, adorned, and masked as gods to sing this song of the Atzaleh. Several hundred people, many from the farthest confines of the Navajo land, have come to sit up all night and witness the public ceremonies. The song is long and is mostly made up of meaningless or obsolete expressions which convey no idea to the mind of the singer, yet not a single vocable may be omitted, mispronounced, or misplaced. A score or more of critics who know the song by heart are listening with strained attention. If the slightest error is made, it is at once proclaimed, the fruitless ceremony terminates abruptly, and the disappointed multitude disperses. 43. The songs all contain significant words, but these, for poetic requirements, are often greatly distorted, and the distortions must be kept in mind. In speaking thus, scant justice is done to the Navajo poets. Similar distortions found in an Aryan tongue with a written literature are spoken of as figures of orthography and etymology, and although there is yet no standard of spelling for the Navajo language, we would perhaps do well to apply the same terms in speaking of the Navajo compositions. The distortions are not always left to the whim of the composer, they are made systematically as a rule. If the language were reduced to a standard spelling, we should find that the Navajo poets have as many figures of these classes as the English poets have, and perhaps more. 44. Some of the words, too, are archaic. They mean nothing in modern Navajo, but the priests assign traditional meanings to them, and this adds to the task of memorizing. But, in addition to the significant words, there are, as instanced above, numerous meaningless vocables in all songs, and these must be recited with a care at least equal to that bestowed on the rest of the composition. These meaningless sounds are commonly introduced in the preludes and refrains of the stanzas and in the verse endings, but they may occur anywhere in the song. 45. The preludes and refrains here referred to are found, with rare exceptions, in every stanza and in every song. Although they are all either totally meaningless or only partly significant, they are the most characteristic parts of the poems, and the singer cons the preludes over when he wishes to call to mind any particular composition, just as we often remember a poem or song by means of the first line. They are rarely or never quite alike in any 2 songs, and great ingenuity is often displayed in giving them variety. 46. There is yet another burden laid on the memory of the singer of sacred songs, and this is the order of their arrangement. The songs of each ceremony are divided into groups which must follow one another in an established order, and each song has, in the group to which it belongs, a place that must not be changed under penalty of divine displeasure. To sing, during the progress of a rite, the 6th song of the whirling sticks before the 5th song is sung, would be a sacrilege as great as to chant the syllables oh-ho-ho-ho in place of e-a-hey. To remember this exact order of sequence in a set of 200 or 300 songs is no easy task. 322. 47. But it may be said, perhaps things were different with the Navajos in Dr. Letherman's day. May they not have learned from other tribes, or have themselves invented all this ceremony and song since he knew them? The reply to this is that it is absurd to suppose that such an elaborate system of rites and songs could have grown up among an illiterate people in the 25 years that elapsed between Dr. Letherman's departure from the Navajo country and the author's arrival there. Besides, the latter obtained his information from men of advanced age, from 60 to 80 years old, who practiced these rites and sang these songs in their youth, and who in turn learned them from men of a departed generation. The shamans who conduct these ceremonies, tell these tales, and sing these songs are scattered widely over the Navajo country. Men who are scarcely acquainted with one another, and who learn from different preceptors, will sing the same sacred songs and to exactly the same tune. All the lore of the Navajo priesthood was undoubtedly extant in Dr. Letherman's time and for ages before. 48. Songless women. It is remarkable that, while the Navajo men are such fruitful composers of song and such ardent singers, the women, as a rule, do not sing. Among the wild hunting tribes of the North, as the author knew them 30 years ago, the women not only had songs of their own, but they took part in the ceremonial songs of the men. The Pueblo Indian women of New Mexico, neighbors of the Navajos, have many fine songs, the song of the corn grinders, often heard in Zuni, being especially wild and musical. But usually the Navajo woman is songless. The writer tried a long time to find a woman who could sing, and offered good pecuniary inducements before he got one. She came from a distance of 30 miles. She knew no songs peculiar to her sex, but her father was a medicine man, who frequently repeated his songs at home in order to familiarize himself with them, and she gradually picked up several of them. She sang in a musical soprano with much spirit, and was one of the most pleasing singers heard in the tribe. 49. Figures of speech. It is probable that all rhetorical figures of speech known to our poets may be found in these simple compositions of the Navajos. But in many cases the allusions are to such recondite matters of symbolism, or incidents in their myths, that they could be made plain, if at all, only by a tedious recital. Thus it would not be easy to make clear in a few words why, when the goddess Essanadalhi in one of the songs to her honor is spoken of as climbing a wand of turquoise, we know the poet means to say she is ascending San Mateo Mountain in New Mexico, or why, when he speaks of her as climbing a wand of haliotis shell, he is endeavoring to tell us that she is ascending the peak of San Francisco in Arizona. Yet we may gain some idea of the meaning by referring to the myth, par 193. 50. But some of the metaphors and similes are not so hard to understand. Here is a translation of the Dove Song, one of the gambling songs sung in the game of Kezitsi. Was Was picks them up, seeds. Was Was picks them up. Glossy Locks picks them up. Red Moccasin picks them up. Was Was picks them up. 273, 316. Here, Was Was, wash wash, is an onomatope for the dove, equivalent to our cuckoo, but it is used as a noun. Glossy locks and red moccasin are figurative expressions for the dove, of obvious significance. Metaphor and synecdoche are here combined. 51. Antithesis is not an uncommon figure with the Navajo poet. Here is an instance of it in a song belonging to the mountain chant, one of the great 9-day ceremonies of the shamans. The voice that beautifies the land, the voice above, the voice of the thunder, among the dark clouds. Again and again it sounds, the voice that beautifies the land, the voice that beautifies the land, the voice below, the voice of the grasshopper, among the flowers and grasses. Again and again it sounds, the voice that beautifies the land. Here the great voice of the thunder above is contrasted with the feeble voice of the grasshopper below, yet both are voices that make the world beautiful. 52. Many instances of climax have been noted. One here presented is from the mountain chant. It has but 2 steps to the ladder. Maid who becomes a bear. Sought the gods and found them. On the summits of the mountains. Sought the gods and found them. Truly with my sacrifice. Sought the gods and found them. Somebody doubts it, so I have heard. Holy young woman. Sought the gods and found them. On the summits of the clouds. Sought the gods and found them. Truly with my sacrifice. Sought the gods and found them. Somebody doubts it, so I have heard. Maid who becomes a bear, Sauce Natalhi, is an important character in Navajo mythology. The last line in each stanza is an instance of irony. It will be seen from the instances given that they understand the value of repetition in poetry. The refrain is a favorite form of expression, but they know of other means of giving verbal melody to their songs, as may be seen in the following original text of the Bluebird, Cialia Arctica song. Tsiheoki dola ani, ias datieli z biza halo, biza hozonigo, biza halo, biza holenigo huaihe inli, dola ani, dola ani. To appreciate this, a translation is not necessary, but it is given as the reader may wish to know it. Just at daylight Cialia calls. The bluebird has a voice. He has a voice, his voice melodious. His voice melodious that flows in gladness. Cialia calls. Cialia calls. The regular Navajo name for the bluebird, Dolai, changed here to Dola for poetic reasons, is translated Cialia to distinguish it from the descriptive term Is.tlez, which means literally bluebird. Rhyme. They are not ignorant of the value of rhyme in poetry, but they more often produce this by the repetition of significant or meaningless syllables than by selecting different words with similar endings. Still, we often find this, the more difficult means, resorted to as in the above song of the bluebird. Music. To the casual listener it may appear that there is much sameness in the music of their songs, but a more careful study will reveal the fact that the variety is great. It is remarkable how, with such rude instruments, an inverted basket for a drum, and a gourd rattle to accompany them, they succeed, in a series of 200 or more songs, in producing so many musical changes. In their sacred songs of sequence, where 4 or more songs of similar import follow one another, as is often the case, the music may be nearly alike, but never quite alike in all. But when the theme of the poetry changes, the music also takes a decided change. For further information on the subject of music, the reader is referred to Note 272, which contains remarks by Professor John Comfort Fillmore, formerly of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but now of Claremont, California. Over 2 years ago, the writer sent a number of phonographic records of Navajo songs to Professor Fillmore, who has diligently studied them and has written many of them in musical notation. Some of the musical scores are appended to the note.